Hello, and we are back with episode 108 with the Vacation Rental Blueprint. Here we are. We could say back and better than ever, or maybe just back and trying as hard as we can. I don't know which one it is. We're trying to get better each and every episode, but as always, TC is joining me for what I hope is a really impactful episode because we're finally starting to talk about cash.
Money.
TC, how are you?
Recovering from a cold, seems to be going
Whew.
around, kicking my rear end, all that good stuff, and trying to keep an eye on what the heck is going on with the banking industry right now. And just seems like every day there's new stuff to follow. So interesting world we have today, Tim.
Maybe we'll kick off these episodes. Our producer Ari, we've asked her to give us feedback and keep challenging us to get better. And she said, "You guys got to stop jumping right into the meat and the potatoes of the episode. You've got to have a little banter." And I was like, "Well, before I hit record, we talk for like 45 minutes, so we'll just hit record a little earlier." And so we're trying that out. Everyone comment below if you like that, or if it's just, "Hey guys, shut up, start talking about what you need to talk about because you said cash." But it's a work in progress, right?
Ari, give us feedback. Is this the banter you were looking for or not? Give us feedback.
we are also trying to be a little meta too. So we're showing you how the sausage is made, and here's our banter. So let's see if it works. All right, TC, cash. Today we're talking cash. I mean, we've done 7 episodes up to this point. We don't necessarily want to start on the cash side in our conversation because so much of what you need to do is get your mind right, getting into this investment game and jumping into something that maybe was sold to you as a bill of goods focused on, oh, you're going to print cash. I think I say that every few episodes because it aggravates the holy heck out of me. This is not an industry that is going to print cash for you with you just sitting back on a beach relaxing. It requires you to do some work. And really plan a strategy and execute that strategy. And then as you grow your business, sure, there's a reality or there's a scenario that allows you to take more of a passive approach. But starting out in any business is not the time to think that you're going to sit back, relax, and just count the money as it rolls in. So we did 7 episodes of foundational pieces to think about operationally when setting up your business. And now hopefully before you're jumping into a home search or really starting to put pen to paper on contracts, you need to have an understanding of from top to bottom how the cash is going to flow. Many of you listening are going to be investing using a combination of cash and long-term debt. And so you've got to be able to understand that cash you put in has to work for you, has to get a return that meets your goals, and you have to have those goals. So today we're talking cash on cash return, and I think from there, we can really go into the nuts and bolts of what that means and how you kind of maneuver that and come to a point where you have a plan, and then you can execute that plan all the while keeping track on what is the return on the cash I've invested, and is it performing to the point that I planned for? And then if not, what can I do? What steps can I take? What strategies can I employ to adjust that result to the best of my ability?
Yeah, and a short-term rental property, it is an investment. And like with all investments, you want a certain return. And I think that's how we should all think about it as investors in short-term rental properties is what do I expect as my return? And, is that return that you're expecting better than what you can get on just a typical investment? And then to make the decision on this investment, we've got to have a framework. And the framework we're going to talk about today, it's not the only framework out there. You can Google search and probably come up with a multitude of frameworks. This one works for us. It's pretty straightforward. And we thought we'd share it with our audience today as a nice framework to use when thinking about your investment and what you expect to get out of that investment.
So objective, strategy, tactics. That's our framework. We've talked about it from the very beginning when we were kind of planning out how we were going to approach this. We knew the market. We were familiar with the market because we were consistently traveling to this market, and we're originally from this area too. So we had a general understanding of where we wanted to enter, where we wanted to look, and I think that really started to take us down the path to informing our objective, right? And I think that's kind of what kicked it off for us. Is we weren't going to just jump into something without a clear objective. That's not how we're wired. We wouldn't be where we are today, it had we not just out of practice put together objectives to achieve in the businesses that we've been a part of.
Yeah, so I think if we just spell out what these different terms mean so that we all start from the same place, the way we think about an objective, it's our goals. What is the desired outcome that we have? The strategies, what's the plan to get there? And then the tactics, what are those individual activities that we are going to do as part of our strategy? So, before we make any investment, that's the framework we use. What's our objective? What's the strategy that we are going to deploy? And then what are the tactics that we're going to start working on each and every day? And, we can certainly make or use the most recent investment we made as an example just to talk our audience through, how we think about this. And, why do we use this framework? Well, it's like any other investment. If you're going to buy a short term rental property, similar to our experience, you're going to have a down payment that's cash out of pocket. You're going to have to pay closing costs, that's cash out of pocket. And in many cases, you're going to have to do some furnishings, some decor, all that's cash out of pocket. So that lump sum of cash that you invest in your short term rental, what's it going to return year one? And that's how we think about a cash on cash return. It's year one cash on cash return. If you're going to invest, call it a couple $100,000 in down payments, closing costs, and in decor and furnishings, are you going to get a return on that that is an appropriate return? Or should you invest that money someplace else? So we're not here to talk you into or out of an investment, but instead to give you a framework to think about to make good investments.
And if your objective is, I want a home that my family can stay at and enjoy as our own vacation rental, that's great. I mean, this is where we can't provide you with a set strategy and tactics for that strategy that are going to just work for everyone, because everyone's objectives are a little different. I think I've gone into it before where I said, okay, well, I'm going to invest in this because I'm gonna have some personal benefit to this. I'm going to bring my family out here, and then very quickly that that objective, as I started to work through the strategy and the numbers, I was like, well, okay, we're not going to be using it as much because that's not where I really see my strategy taking me. So let's go back to our objective, and let's just get that objective locked into what works for us. One of the approaches to building your objective that's never going to work for you is I'm looking for easy money. And this is it, because we know now, especially the area I'm in, housing prices are at an all-time high, and interest rates aren't helping any sort of cash investment. So again, that objective is really about the individual, and it's about going through some key questions. And TC, I mean, I'd love to hear, when you were going through, building your objectives, what are some key questions that you think about to kind of help anyone looking to get into this investment and say, man, it's really expensive to get in there right now? Okay, well, that doesn't mean you can't build out your objectives and start to really plan now for when the time is right. So what are some of those objectives? What are some of those questions one can ask themselves to help them get to a point with a clear objective?
Well, I think if we just think about the most recent property we purchased, we had three objectives. Objective one was we wanted to have a 20% cash on cash return. and we were willing to accept a 15% year one cash on cash return. Why lower year one? Well, that first year is when you're going to have investments in furnishings, decor, and so forth. So that was the first objective, 20% cash on cash return each year. Year one, we're willing to accept 15%, but we weren't willing to drop below that. Our second objective was we wanted a home that our family would be comfortable in. So we wanted a vacation home or a short term rental that when we use it, it'd be something that we'd be comfortable in, both decor, decorations, and location. And then finally, we wanted a property that was going to appreciate in 5 years. Now, that's three objectives. And the way we think about this, you've always got to optimize to one. In other words, you may have three objectives, but which one are you going to optimize to? We selected the 20% cash on cash return or year one, 15% cash on cash return. So those were the objectives that we went into when we were thinking about buying another short term rental home. Now, again, I'm going to underscore here this is a framework that we like to use before we even go out looking at real estate. Now, in some cases, listeners may already have that short term rental property. This still applies, and we'll come back and share with you how to think about using the objective strategy and tactics framework if you already own. But this example is going to be how we apply it before we even start looking at real estate so that we look at and select real estate that fits our ultimate model. But that was the objectives: short cash on cash return, family use, comfort, and finally appreciate in 5 years. So then we have to start thinking about strategies. So, Tim, after we set the objectives, the next was strategy.
So before we go to strategy, I think one of those questions that is going to pop up into a lot of listeners' heads is, why 20%? What motivated 20%? I mean, adjusting to 15% in year one makes sense, but is 20% simply when you compare that to other investments or other utilizations of available cash? 20% was, something that was a motivator to you to use that money in that way?
Yeah, so I thought about the 20% and the 15% year one this way. If I invest, let's just use a $500,000 home as an example. If I'm going to put 20% down, well, there's $100,000. I'm going to have
Hmm.
closing costs. Let's call that $5,000. And I'm going to have to furnish and decorate it. Call that another $100,000. So a little over $200,000. If I'm going to use that much cash on this short-term rental property, the return on it has to be greater than I can get in other places. And we
Right.
know today what's happening with short-term treasuries. Heck, I can get 5% just on short-term treasuries. So there's five. I want to make sure I can beat that. We can go into the stock market and we trade options pretty rigorously. We can get an easy 10 to 15% trading options and analyzing the market and what's happening within market conditions. So when I thought about this, I thought, okay, well, I can get 5% here. I can get 10 to 15% here. This short term rental property, I'd like to exceed that. And
Right.
20% is my benchmark. Now, someone else may look at this and say, hey, I'd be happy with 15%. Great.
Right.
Everyone's going to have their own objectives.
Exactly.
For us, we could easily get 15% other places. So 20% for that large amount of cash became the way we thought about kind of that benchmark of what we want to achieve.
And then when we talked about, when we were talking through this with, appreciation and, the beauty of property appreciating, especially, when you look at over the last 10 years, and we've selected markets that are growing rapidly, and thus, you can build a strategy around appreciation in 5 years. I think a lot of people getting into this space over the last 2 years have seen sort of an accelerated appreciation, right? Like they saw just astronomical valuation increases in a very short amount of time, and now that's slowing down. Have you kind of changed your or made any adjustments to that objective, the appreciation in 5 years, in terms of how the market and the real estate market has changed? And I'm thinking, has 5 years become 7 years, or are you considering changing that, or are you still feeling good with 5 years?
I think it really comes down to when did you buy? So we were fortunate on the
Yeah.
first couple that we bought at the right time, and that appreciation objective is going to be pretty straightforward to reach. But if you think about it this way, the the renter who's paying the rent with every reservation, they're paying your mortgage, and therefore they're building equity on your behalf. So you're getting equity there. And then if you just get the standard 3 to 5% appreciation year over year, you not only have somebody else paying your mortgage and therefore building equity for you, but even the 3 to 5% appreciation, that starts to really compound nicely year over year. I think most investors that get into this maybe last year, this year, their appreciation horizon may have to be a little bit longer, but I wouldn't let that discourage anybody. It just means that, you can't buy a home and flip it in 3 years. You may have to hang on to it a little bit longer. But if you set your strategies and your tactics right, then there's no reason why you wouldn't want to hold on to it. As long as you're covering all your costs, you're hitting your cash on cash returns, someone else is paying your mortgage and building equity for you. So there's no reason to sell it. And therefore, the appreciation becomes a little less important, which is why we prioritize it number three of our three objectives. So, number one was our cash on cash return. Number two was a location and a furnishings package that would be comfortable for our family. And then number three was all about appreciation.
And keeping in mind that appreciation and that plan for over 5 years what you expect to happen, I think that taking that mindset is a good reminder that, as an owner, as a business owner, you have to maintain the integrity of that property over the course of that time. If it's 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, your responsibility is to maintain the integrity of that property. And as we talked about in episode 106, the cleanliness and working with the right partners within the industry to maintain your property is really uh, that long-term strategy to maintain the value of your property. And this is where our sponsor of CleaningBnB, it's working with and working to source top tier cleaning companies that are committed to maintaining your property. Because if your goal, yeah, you want a 20% cash on cash return, you want a home for your family to be comfortable in as they visit, and just as a general design aesthetic, you want it to be something that you would enjoy staying in. But then also, this is a property that, if you've got 60% occupancy over the course of 5 years, that's a lot of feet and a lot of hands in that property, living in that property and enjoying it. It's really going to require that a partnership with a great cleaning company, great service company, just great partners is really going to pay off, because it allows you to maintain the high quality of that property. I've seen far too many properties that year one they're great. Oh man, they've got this awesome themed bedroom. It's a beautiful home, and then 6 months in, you've worked with a cleaning company that just did not take and place the right amount of value on and attention to detail and executing cleaning and sanitation, kind of just general procedures. Uh, and so now you're not even year one in, and your house looks like it's been lived in for 3, 4, 5 years. And this goes back to why we work with CleaningBnB as our sponsor here, is because they're truly committed to not just hiring any cleaning company. They're committed to bringing on the best of the best cleaning companies and incentivizing them accordingly to work with them, but then also sourcing and developing future cleaning companies, new entrepreneurs who are interested in starting their own business. Well, CleaningBnB has a whole platform of services to allow that individual to maybe say, hey, I don't want to be a manager at this restaurant anymore. I don't want to be working at this, business that I'm going nowhere fast in. I want to own my own business. I want to start my own business. And Cleaning B&B is doing a lot of great things in that space as well to get people excited about operating their own business. So, yeah, that was a total and complete plug for Cleaning B&B that I just filtered into our episode expertly, I might add, TC.
Yeah, so I think, we have our objectives. And again, this is an actual property that we applied this to. So the objectives, 20% cash on cash return, 5-year appreciation, and design and decorated that our family would be comfortable in. The next was, okay, well, what strategy are we going to use to achieve that or those objectives? Well, there were three pieces of strategy that we really thought hard about. One was we wanted to develop a pro forma early on because that pro forma was going to help guide the purchase price that we could look at when purchasing a short-term rental property. In other words, when we build the pro forma, we're going to be able to back into how much can we pay for this home.
So, real quick with a pro forma for everyone listening, just kind of briefly define it.
Yeah, so a pro forma is simply a model. It's what you believe to be true. So what we do is we just take an Excel spreadsheet and we build in the costs that we know are going to apply. And then we're able to back into what do we need the revenue to be? And then from there, we can back into what the purchase price can be. So it's
Hmm.
simply an Excel spreadsheet that allows us to calculate all of our assumptions into a model and what our annual operating revenue will be.
So, should we do a separate episode on a pro forma? Do you think that would probably be something we could plan for our listeners?
I think probably a separate one with an actual model that we can populate with real data that we apply.
Heard. I need to learn how to screen share so that people following along on our YouTube channel just don't see my bald head. Okay, heard. Okay,
So
proceed.
So strategy one, let's develop that pro forma. And that pro forma forces us to apply a discipline to how much we can pay for a short-term rental property. Second is we know from experience that when we're building our pro forma, our second strategy is we're going to assume we're going to self-manage. So that's another strategy, self manage. And when we build the pro forma, we're not going to build in any cost for a property manager, but we have to build in other costs like technology that we talked about in a previous show. And then the third strategy was we need to go out and find a designer that is aligned with our tastes and what we want to achieve and that we have confidence in to develop a budget for furniture, decor, design elements, etc. So those were the three primary strategies. One, let's build a pro forma. Let's give ourselves a real nice guide that helps us decide how much we can pay for a home. Secondly, after we do that, we're going to assume we're going to self-manage. So let's build that pro forma through the lens of self-managing. And then third, we've got to be finding that designer who can be aligned with us on the furnishings, decor, etc., to make the home really come to life through our lens, and hopefully would be also very appealing to renters.
And I think it's no secret if you've been listening along. If you haven't, please like and subscribe. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast platform, and you have a little bit of catching up to do. But we are going to almost every episode, if not every episode, advocate for self managing, and I think that strategy right there, as we've looked at it, uh, gives you real money to flow through your pro forma. I mean, TC, I would say it's probably roughly 25% of your revenue that you would have to allocate toward property management if you chose not to go self management. Would you say that's generally correct?
Yeah, we know from other performers that we've developed that when we first started investing in short term rental properties, when you apply that 20 to 25% property management fee to your performa, um, best case, we were making single digit cash on cash returns. Why do that? I mean, why would I ever invest a couple $100,000 on something that I can get a 5 or 6% return? Heck, let's go the safe route and just put that into a short term T bill and get 5%. So um,
Exactly.
we could never find a way. And again, maybe there's someone out there that has figured it out. By all means, reach out. Love to have you on the show. But we couldn't find a way to put a property management fee into our performa and still deliver the 20% cash on cash we were looking to develop.
And that's exactly it. I mean, that is, I have this conversation fairly regularly: property management versus self management, and it gets back to, well, a great property manager, they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you're not going to have to worry about this, and it's like, okay, if you find a great property manager, you're not wrong. But where you're miscalculating is on cash return. This now changes your investment and places it lower in terms of best use of your available cash. So if that's your goal, to use a property manager so you don't have to worry about the property, there's plenty of other ways to invest that money that will get you a single digit return that doesn't require you buying property, to be honest. And I think that's where connecting those dots is so important, because yeah, there's good property managers out there, there's really bad property managers out there, and then you can make the case there's a few really great ones around the country. But it just changes your framework. I mean, it changes what you can deliver and how that cash is going to be able to work for you. And to me, it's a non-starter. I would never put a single dollar into, personally. And again, this is just my opinion and how I approach it, but I would never put a dollar into an investment property that was a single digit cash on cash return because I was leveraging a property manager. I want to maximize the return, and self managing with a clear framework, strategy, systems, and processes. That's the best. That's one of the better uses that I can think of for cash to invest.
Well, and if we apply real numbers to this framework that we've introduced so far, so when we ran our pro forma on our most recent investment, it came back and told us that we could invest $600,000 in a short term rental property. That was the number. So $600,000, 20% down. There's $120,000 of cash. Let's all do this math together. So $120,000 in cash. We're going to have $5,000 in closing costs. So now we're at $125,000. And then we reached out to a designer in the Central Florida area that we'll have on the show in the future. And shout out to Tammy. Tammy does amazing work, and she put together a package for us: furniture, decor, design features that we could do for about $150,000. Okay, so you've got $175,000 invested, and we want a 20% cash on cash return. So, quite easy: 20% of $175,000. I think if my math is right, it's like $35,000. So, we needed our net operating income year one to be $35,000. And when we built the pro forma, that worked. So, with that investment, $120,000 down, 5,000 closing, and then the investment in the furnishings, decor, etc. With that investment, and we were going to manage it ourselves, so no property manager. We were able to, with 150 nights of rental at $695 a night. That's how we built our pro forma. So 150 nights is about a 50% occupancy, very conservative. But at 150 nights at 695, we were going to generate about $105,000 of rental income. And after all of the expenses that we detailed out on our pro forma, we were going to generate $40,000 of net operating income. So that $40,000 of net operating income exceeded our 20% cash on cash objective. And that gave us the green light to move forward negotiating on that property, Tim.
And it's that type of exercise that I think is missed far too often. Especially now when you're looking at a lot of these investment property prices maybe not dropping, maybe not decreasing as quickly as people would have thought, or maybe they're exactly where people would have thought. I don't know. But when you combine that with a higher interest rate, that really starts to, I mean, for lack of a better term, really starts to screw up a lot of your pro forma assumptions when you are building your model, because there's only 365 days in the year that you can rent. And there's a general ceiling of average nightly rate you can get depending on the area you invest in. And I've unfortunately talked to far too many people that when we run through what the average nightly rate is that they can realistically get in the area, and then we're like, okay, well, you need to have 118% occupancy for the year. So you see how that doesn't that doesn't work. But it really does require you to sit down, and you mentioned 50% occupancy on the conservative side. And I think when you really sit down and work through the numbers on what occupancy will look like for your property, and you think the 365 days, but there's 52 weekends in a year, how are you going to maintain anything above 50% occupancy over the course of a year at your rental? And if you can't really talk through a strategy for that, uh, you know, I would advocate heavily for you to be conservative on your occupancy rate, because it's tempting at times to make it fit, right? And the expenses are the expenses. If you modeled those out correctly, you have a good general sense on what the cost to maintain your property over the course of the year is going to be. And then at times it can be very tempting for maybe a more inexperienced uh, pro forma executor or planner to say, well, what if I just go up on rate a little bit here, or what if I just, instead of 50%, let's take this to 65% occupancy. Look, the numbers work now. TC, look, we're hitting it. We're hitting our goals. And it's very important to come at this, I think. And again, this is my opinion, but I do think you need to be conservative in how you're planning out your revenue for the year, or else you get 3 months into the year. And I've heard this from a few now with the unfortunate term Airbnb bust. I've heard that term far too often. And I'm hearing from people who they're going on 4 months into the year, and they've only had a handful of rentals, and maybe they modeled a 60% occupancy for the year. So I do think that taking the time on your pro forma to map out a realistic, it can be aggressive, but a realistic plan for how this business is going to hit these cash on cash return targets is so essential.
Well, and we've made this mistake before, and I would share it with this audience because hopefully the mistakes we've made prevent you from making the same. There was one property that we decided to buy before we ran the performa, and then we made the numbers in the performa work. And biggest mistake you can make, because that's when emotion is overshadowing good financial planning and good pro forma building. And when we built our pro forma for this one that we purchased most recently, yeah, we set our pro forma at 695 a night, but we also built it in such a way that if we had to lower our rates down to 575, we could still meet our year one threshold of 15% cash on cash return. So we know, or we knew when we bought it, we had that 575 to 695 a night range to play within or to move within to still hit our one of our financial objectives. And now if we had to dip below 575, we would start falling below one of our objectives, which was year one, 15% cash on cash return. So we have visibility to all of that so that we can manage our business, manage our performa, manage our property in such a way to make sure that we are going to achieve that optimized objective number one, which is cash on cash return.
I think those three strategies were hopefully very helpful to our listeners. And from there, kind of where do we take it?
So I think now we talk about tactics. So let's
Yeah.
review. Our objectives were 20% cash on cash return. We wanted a home that was decorated, designed to be comfortable for our family. And we wanted a property that would appreciate in 5 years. And then we decided to optimize to the cash on cash return. So that was going to be our priority. For the strategies, we decided to self manage, build a performa with self management incorporated into the performa, take a conservative approach and develop a range of rental income, but also back into what we could afford to pay for the house. And now it comes down to the tactics. So we bought the home, and what are we going to do? Well, we've already had some shows about this. We have to find a great cleaning team. We have to find great partners because we've decided to self manage. We have to go out and find the technology because we've
Yep.
decided to self manage. We needed to really force ourselves into developing our communication strategy because we were going to over index in the hospitality arena. And then finally, we were going to want to start to think about developing our own website for the property because long term, we're going to maximize our cash on cash return if we can avoid some of the fees on the platforms like Airbnb and VRBO. We can't avoid those early on, but long term, we
Right.
can start thinking about that. So, those were some immediate, midterm, and long term tactics that we put in our playbook to start to execute to.
So how should a listener think about those platform fees in their pro forma? Is that something that they need to think about in terms of allocating for that in the pro forma, or is that something where that is above or beyond the pro forma?
So again, I take a pretty conservative approach here. If I'm going to charge $695 a night in rental income, I'm going to assume the platform is going to take 10% of that. That
Okay.
amount they take is going to vary, but I put 10% of that 695 a night is going to go right to the platform for their fee. It's a conservative approach, but if you don't bake it into your performa, you aren't providing the best data to do your analytics on.
I think that's a really important piece. And then also, the reserves, managing, in your pro forma, planning for some cash reserves. It's a point I bring up because it's a point that I think is missed far too often, or something that is under allocated in a pro forma. The reality is you're welcoming guests into your vacation rental, and you're welcoming them, and you are, even though hope is not a strategy, you are hoping that they are going to enter your space and take care of it while they're there. But there is a likelihood, there is a probability that that could not happen. And I've unfortunately heard those stories of, an owner, her first guest stay had a TV that was broken, and some broken glass in places, and just had some damages that they hadn't allocated funds for. And here they are. Okay, they can hopefully get those damages recovered, if, as we've talked about in prior episodes, if they had a pre-check-in and post-checkout inspection to properly identify and timestamp photos showing before the guest arrived and after the guest arrived. But ultimately, they've got to get this house on the market again so they can rent it. And if they don't have televisions, or if there's damages, they have to recover for those quickly, and they need to take some cash out of pocket to make those changes. So, I mean, cash reserves and planning for some of those fees through the platforms, those are two misses that I see far too often to make me comfortable.
Yeah, we build reserves into our performa, and we've increased the amount that we set aside in reserve just because history tells us that we're going to need that cash, and that's an expense on your business. So we're getting ready to dip into that reserve in about 30 days because we've got some paint that we have to do in the house. We've got some molding that's been damaged that's got to be repaired. There's been a couple of doors where they were slammed open and the door jamb poked a hole in the door. So we've got a variety of things that we have to do, probably going to cost a couple $1,000s. And that $2,000, it's a use of cash, yes, but it's already built into my pro forma. So that cash is a reserve. I can use that. And that utilization of cash is already built into the pro forma and already part of the cash on cash return. Now, if I have to spend more than I have set up in reserve, that's going to be a detriment to the cash on cash return. So, really important. And we will talk about this when we do the episode on the performa. Put in the correct amount for the reserve. It's one of the reasons why we walked away from that beachfront location. Every owner that we talked to, they gave us the dollar amount that they were having to set aside for reserve due to either high winds, hurricanes, or just the elements of being near the ocean. That reserve was so high that it had such a negative impact on the performa that we had to walk away from it. Today's episode, we really wanted to introduce a framework. Once again, it's not the only framework out there. It's one that we like. It works for us. We use it. Objective strategy, tactics. It forces you to apply a discipline to your investment so that you're making a well-informed decision on when to use your hard-earned cash for the investment and what you expect it to produce. Now, after that year one is when you have your down payment and your closing costs and your decorating costs. Year two and beyond, you ought to see that cash on cash return grow nicely. And the one thing I think we should underscore here before we close is that this business of short-term rentals is like any other business. It's cyclical. It's going to have its peaks, it's going to have its valleys. And when you look at the performance of your investment, look at it as a long term. Are you reaching your long term objectives? There may be some years where your cash on cash return is 35%. Great year. There may be other years where it's 13, 14%. So when it turns 13, 14%, it's not the time to panic and sell. Probably the worst time to sell. Keep in mind, this business is cyclical. Right now, we're in a down cycle. Rents are lower than they were during the COVID era. They're lower for a number of reasons. That too shall pass. The rental income will come back up. We've got to wait it out. But if you build your performance in such a way that it's conservative, when you have that down year, you don't have to panic. You can weather that and get through until the next cycle takes hold.
And then as those fluctuations occur, how should a listener be thinking about making adjustments to a pro forma? It's that piece of, you set an objective. We set 20% as a cash on cash return. Just because you have a great year one and maybe you exceed your 15% year one, it doesn't mean you need to jump into your strategy and make all these crazy adjustments because the market's always going to go up, right? It's a matter of knowing, when do you need to take another look and make adjustments to your objectives, strategies, and tactics to essentially pull the levers to positively impact your business.
Yeah, it's a good question. And the way I think about this is when I look at my performa during those down cycles, I don't look to cut expenses. By that, I mean, I'm not going to clean the pool less often. I'm not going to do repairs and maintenance less often. I'm not going to do anything that negatively impacts the integrity of the asset. But my two throttles, the two things that I can throttle during down cycle is what I charge for nightly rent and the way I approach occupancy. So when I built my performa, I looked at 50% occupancy and premium pricing. During the down cycle, I may get a bit more aggressive on pricing, but when I do that, I'm going to expect my occupancy to go up a bit. And that just takes more time. It takes more time in analyzing the market for pricing. We can get into that in a future episode. Some of these algorithms on pricing, hate them. Number of reasons why I hate them.
Whew.
Maybe there's a great one out there. I sure haven't found it yet. We'll talk a lot about that. But those are the two
We'll keep
throttles that
looking.
I see. And we can talk about that because the last thing we want our listeners to do is try to sell a property during a down cycle because they're not going to get top price for for the home, and there's no reason to. Let's use our business sense. Let's throttle those things that we can use, and live to fight a day when the cycle comes back.
Well, and also for individuals looking to get into the space, or looking to expand. I know we just made the call out that now is not the time to sell. The reality is there are some individuals who maybe didn't map out their cash on cash return, or have never built a pro forma, and here they are holding a property or two, and they need to get out. I think that's, again, as an investor looking to either enter or expand within the short term rental or vacation rental space, now's the time to really be working through these exercises, working through some pro formas, some models, and figuring out if the opportunity arises, if the market continues to challenge some investors, uh, what can I do now to be ready, and what can I do now to understand what entry point works for me to be able to get into the space or expand the space. And this is where this cash on cash return exercise and framework is really going to help. Yes, existing, but also future vacation rental owners or short term rental owners to be ready. Maybe now isn't the time for you to enter the market, but how are you going to know unless you really spend this time planning and mapping out and working with great partners to get you ready? I mean, we'll have some a great lending professional on in the next few episodes, and we'll continue to add some guests to our show to be able to get a more expert knowledge in front of you so that you can help make the most informed decision. But I can't push enough right now of okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't the right time to get into the market. I've seen a lot of other podcasts out there just taking a very negative approach and saying, oh, now it's just not the time, don't do it. Why I would never buy a vacation rental right now. I've seen that, and it infuriates me because everyone's situation, everyone's position is different. And if you do the work to build a strategy, to build your pro forma, to make the decision if you're going to self manage or property manage, understand what your cash on cash return is going to be, you you're ready to invest when the time is right for you, and it's not necessarily going to be dictated by what the market is doing.
No, you're right, and I too really dislike it when you've got these podcasters out there saying no one should buy a short-term rental. Well, that's hyperbole. That's ridiculous because absolutes like that never apply. I'll give you an example. Tim, you and I were looking at this one property, and we really liked this property. We had our eye on it, and it was selling too high. And we
Yep.
knew that. So we backed off. We built the performer. We knew it wasn't going to work. So we just kept watching it, watching it, watching it. Well, one day, this seller dropped it by $200,000. And you could tell it was a panic sell. So
Yep.
every cycle presents opportunities. We tried to jump on that the minute it dropped to that low price point. It's just when it did, so many people became interested that we lost out. My message
Yeah.
here is even in down cycles, when panic selling happens, that creates opportunities for those that have built their performa and know how to buy and invest wisely.
And I think that's the right call to action to end this episode. As I was a bit worried, when you and I start talking through cash, we can go we can go for a while. This is a little bit longer of an episode, but such an important episode. If you've kind of been on the journey with us through the first 8 episodes and really mapped out all of the important foundational pieces to getting into this really exciting industry, now looking at the financials and planning those financials really requires you to go at it from a very strategic perspective. And hopefully, we were able to be helpful to you in making sure that you had the foundations to start thinking through this strategically, and hopefully start building pro forma for yourself and thinking about occupancy and rates and your expenses and how they're all going to play into a potential cash on cash return here in 2023 and beyond. So as always, I want to thank our sponsor CleaningBnB, And please check them out at cleaningbnb.com if you're looking for a cleaning solution for your vacation rental, currently in the Central Florida Kissimmee area and expanding, growing quickly as they bring on amazing and work to vet amazing cleaning companies and empower small business owners to get started in the cleaning space. So, TC, any closing thoughts or comments? And from there, I think we're good to wrap up this episode.
I think you're right. Great episode. And, looking forward to our next one, which I think is going to build on this idea of cash on cash return and get into a bit more detail.
Yeah, we owe everyone, we owe all of our listeners more cash conversations, and we trust us. We've been wanting to do this. We just wanted to get through the foundational pieces because they're so important. So more to come, more details, more strategies, and hopefully more help for you, the listener, as you consider and hopefully jump into investing in short term rentals. So TC, as always, a pleasure, and look forward to our next episode.